Hello and welcome to Sound Librarian. I'm Stefan Schutz. Bioshock 2 is probably one of my favourite games of all time, easily in the top 10. This is actually, I know this is quite contentious because I know a lot of people think that Bioshock 1 was a far better game and a lot of people were disappointed with Bioshock 2. For me, the motivation as to why it's one of my favourite games is very, very different to what a lot of people understand about Bioshock 2. For me, obviously, the sound and music were very, very important. But also, I personally felt that Bioshock 2, perhaps it was just at the time when I played it, but it was one of the games that really, really had a strong narrative. And that was very, very significant for me. But also that the sound and the music did a wonderful job of building that narrative and forming that narrative. So I'm going to use an analysis of Bioshock 2 to explain a lot about what's going on within the narrative of Bioshock 2 and what they've achieved with the sound and with the music. And it will also probably explain a little bit why this is one of my choices as one of my favourite games of all time. So let's have a look at Bioshock 2.
Look, Daddy, it's you. Let's go out to play, Daddy.
Firstly, I really need to apologise for interrupting this piece of music. In my opinion, it has got to be one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written for a computer game. It does a very, very good job of setting the entire scene of the whole narrative of this game. This introduction I've included because I think it's actually a very, very important part of analysing the audio of the entire game. Obviously, the opening videos for a lot of games do define the storyline and some of the characters, but this one does more than that. This one really, really plays out the relationship between the Big Daddy, which is a player character, and the Little Sisters. Even though you don't interact with Little Sisters throughout the entire game all the time, they are a critical part of the story that's being told. And this reaction here is exactly why. Regardless of what the Big Daddy is exactly supposed to be or the motivations behind the Little Sisters, the relationship here is really exactly how any father and daughter relationship would be. Perhaps a little bit more violently in the case of protecting the Little Sisters. But this is really, really quite significant. And I found that when I actually played the game, I reacted in this way. Just for reference, I don't have children. And yet when playing this game, I found myself reacting in exactly this way when I heard one of the Little Sisters scream. I was just furious that anything would threaten them, and defending them was the only thing on my mind at the time. So this introduction is a very, very good contextual starter for what the game is all about, or at least the relationship between the player character and some of the non-player characters within the story.
Now, take the pistol. Place it against your head. Fire.
Can you hear me?
Now, I played through the entirety of the introduction as well as that transition between the introduction and into what we have now, which is the gameplay, for a very specific reason. Normally I wouldn't do that, but if you notice carefully that before you get any control and before you get any visuals returning to the game, the sound is the first thing that comes in. And this is something very, very significant about Bioshock and Bioshock 2. The care and craftsmanship that they put into the sound design is really, really very significant, and they've done an amazing job. One of the main factors about the environment of Rapture and the environment which the player moves around in is the inclusion of water everywhere. We can hear it now. Water flooding into various areas through damage. At times your character will walk through water. The water up ahead here you walk through. Water has all sorts of really, really lovely frequency components. So what we're getting here in some ways is we're getting this lovely blend of higher frequency material that actually provides a really, really crisp, clean environment, and has in some ways a similar sort of effect that if we had birds in an environment. Birds being a nice high frequency part of the content that would make a forest seem more balanced and alive. In this case, we don't have any living creatures. We have the element of water that's providing some nice high frequency elements that can be balanced off against all the lower frequency rumbles and crunches. Now here we have a very, very common element. This has been done in many games, of just introducing elements of narrative via recorded voice. Again, I think Bioshock 2 has done a very, very good job of it, because they've given this entire sort of imaginary, fantastical environment, but at the same time it feels like it's all happening 100 years ago, or in this case 50 years ago. So you're introduced to all these sorts of characters who are, it's like an old sort of black and white movie, but at the same time they're dealing with technology that is arguably higher than what we have now. And then these characters, which are the adversaries, there's quite a lot of little snippets of conversation that are brought into the story. They're not essential to what's going on, but they definitely flesh out the city and make it feel like it's a place full of living, if somewhat insane, characters. Again, we have audio that alerts us to the presence of one of these vending machines. And then, of course, the flash of, what is it, dream state, some sort of psychic event, something to do with the character that you are interacting with later on in the game. This entire sequence here would not be anywhere near as effective without sound.
Daddy was sleeping for such a long time, and Eleanor has missed you. Find her and you'll be all better. Daddy!
So the character dialogue in this game, there isn't necessarily a lot of it, but that there is very well presented and is really, really quite essential to what's going on within the game, and in a lot of ways what motivates the player and drives them forward. The sounds of things like the magical effects and the weapons are all very, very well done and very well crafted. And they add, obviously, the visceral effects that you need for an action game like this. But I don't think they're the stars of the show. I think the environmental sound effects in this game are outstanding, and the character dialogue is just superb in really, really conveying what's going on and being somewhat of an emotional manipulator. Music is the very obvious choice for emotionally manipulating players. But in this game, I think a lot of the dialogue that's presented does a very good job of that as well. Now, this is interesting. I had the realization that within this particular narrative, apart from the main player character who is male, pretty much every significant character in this story is female. The little sisters, the big sister, Sophia Lamb and Tenenbaum are all extraordinarily strong female characters. And I think that's one of the strong points of the narrative of this. Little details like what we just saw there with the Big Daddy outside and the changing of the sound environment to match what's going on, again, are all just nice little touches to making it feel like a dying but still living city.
I haven't had a taste of Adam in weeks.
I don't need to hear your grousing. Go!
See, unlike a lot of games, these two characters are obviously adversaries. You need to overcome them to move on. But I find myself quite often pausing and listening to the conversations. They don't provide anything important to the function of the game, but they are definitely part of the narrative. And this, for me, is one of the significant achievements of the Bioshock series. Bioshock 1 and 2 are perhaps not the first, but definitely mark a point in time where the games industry really started to pay far more attention to the importance of narrative. And I think this is for the better for the whole industry. Again, plenty of environmental sounds, weapon sounds. As I said, these are very well done, but they're not the critical focus of the success of this from an audio point of view, I don't think. You will notice there's not a lot of use of music in general while you're wandering around. In a lot of cases, I don't think that it's needed, and when it is put in, it has far more impact because it's put in for specific reasons. It's not just used as wallpaper. More story elements. One of the other things about these story elements is that if you are interested in listening to them, you want to trigger the recording and you want to have a listen to it. While you're listening to it, you're generally not wanting to get involved in more action. So you'll tend to slow down a little bit and use the time to perhaps explore your immediate environment, as I'm doing here. I really like this from a punctuation point of view. By slowing you down because you're wanting to listen to the recordings and listen to the growing narrative of the story, it means that you spend more time. You get to appreciate more what's going on in the environment, rather than just rushing through, running and gunning. And I think that's a really nice touch.
Big sister doesn't want.
Now, Big Sister is the new adversary in Bioshock 2. In Bioshock 1, the Big Daddies were the adversaries for the player character. They were big, they were slow, and they sounded a little bit like whales with a long, low drone. By contrast, the Big Sister, she's much thinner, she's faster, and her sound is high-pitched and squealy, almost like a modification of a dolphin. So they're almost sort of polar opposites, from male to female, from slow and low to fast and high-pitched. So it's an interesting contrast that this is very much not the same sort of character. And of course we have music in here that accompanies the action of the fight. Again, recorded dialogue from a distance, detached from the immediacy. You're not meeting this person face to face. You are hearing this person speaking over a loudspeaker. They're a disembodied voice. I'm not sure whether that's supposed to be the voice of God type effect, but it certainly alters your perception of the whole event. I also like the pacing from a design and storytelling point of view, where little things will happen that lead you on, as we've just had there. Now, this room is very significant for a number of reasons. We'll watch what happens first, and then I'll describe. And of course, the whole audio environment shifts and changes now that you are submerged. And an indication of tension in the music. But then we return to the original piece of music, which is actually called pair bonding. And yet here, it's actually really quite sad. I envisage this whole room, to me, these two female statues that we see broken are a representation of Rapture herself. This room is such an indication that Rapture is dying. Rapture was just a beautiful city of just glorious design and scope. And as you journey through her, she's just fading, being destroyed, crumbling. And Rapture is yet another female character within this story. And so in a lot of ways, the music we listen to through this scene here is almost a lament for the passing of Rapture. We have another scene play out, very detached. You can barely hear any sound through that wall at all. We have the constant drone from the piece of music that just finished playing that accompanies you through this scene. Again, you can stop and watch, or you can choose to just move on. It's entirely up to you as a player. However, there's one very significant thing in this area. The one sound that is accompanying you all the way through. The sound of your character's breathing. This is not the sound of a monster. This is not the sound of some sort of evil creature. This is the sound of a fairly ordinary sounding human breathing. And I think this first opportunity where you are isolated and alone underwater is a good opportunity for you to actually realize that you aren't some sort of hideous masked monster. You're just a human being, and you have something you're trying to achieve here. And now we get to see Rapture in what's left of her glory. Again, with the music accompanying, but it's somewhat dramatic music. It's music that has indication of drama to come, perhaps, but certainly not anything that is describing the past glory of Rapture or that the current situation is particularly good. We are very close to the end of the level where we will be finishing this particular example. There's one last thing I just want to... Actually, two last things that I want to point out. This is the first one. The sound of the bells drawing us towards the console in here. Very much a comforting sound, not ominous at all. The safety of the end of the level. And as the level fades out, the last thing we have again is the audio.
Okay, so I'm not trying to convince anybody necessarily that Bioshock 2 is a wonderful game. For me, it's very significant. For me, there are things in there that are quite simply just beautiful. And excellence in computer games is becoming a more frequent phenomenon, which is fantastic. Beauty in video games, not so much. And as I said, there are things in Bioshock 2 that I just think are simply beautiful. So, I would encourage you to play through the entire game, keeping in mind a lot of the things that we've looked at in this first level. And if you are interested in game, sound and or music, I really highly recommend that you spend some time having a look at Bioshock 2. And I actually hope that you enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you very, very much for watching.